In today's episode, I want to share with you the secret of how I stopped doom scrolling once and for all. Resilience in Dark Times is a podcast about building up your resilience. But before we can build your resilience up, first we need to help you stop frying your nervous system. And when you doom scroll, that is exactly what you're doing. It's like sticking a fork in an outlet. It's too much. It's too much to process, and it overwhelms your nervous system. But I think you already know this. I think you know that doom scrolling is not good for you, but it's hard to stop. Or maybe you stopped and you put it down for a while, but you always go back. Well, not after today. After today, you will not doom scroll ever again, and I will tell you the secret on how to do that. Welcome to Resilience in Dark Times. I'm your companion and guide, Michael Glavin. If you're feeling overwhelmed by political upheaval and environmental crisis, you're in the right place. This podcast is for everyone who refuses to normalize injustice or ignore planetary emergencies. Together, we'll transform anxiety into action and build the emotional resilience we need to keep fighting. Let's begin. So just so we're on the same page, let's talk about what doom scrolling is. Doom scrolling is not just scrolling through social media or Instagram or TikTok or what have you. While that can be a time suck, and that's an issue in its own right, doom scrolling is when you spend too much time on negative news, which causes you to feel anxious, angry, sad, or depressed. This leads you to seek out more negative news. Doom scrolling can lead to increased stress, anxiety, depression, insomnia. You get the idea. It's not good for your mental or emotional well-being, but it can be so difficult to stop even though you know it's bad for you. You keep doing it. In that way, it's a lot like smoking. I was a smoker for many years, and I tried to quit many times, but I always failed. Until one day, I read a book and it changed everything. And the technique it taught me to quit smoking, in essence, is the same technique that helped me quit doom scrolling earlier this year. The book was called Easy Way to Quit Smoking by Alan Carr. Easy? I was skeptical. But it turns out that I was wrong. It totally worked. I started smoking when I was 19, and to this day, I remember my first cigarette. I was at Antioch College. My friend Amy had this hand-cranked coffee grinder, and she had hazelnut whole bean coffee. I remember the smell of it, and she started grinding the coffee, and she made fresh brewed coffee. And somebody had some loose tobacco, and I don't remember if I rolled it. If I rolled it, it probably was a terrible cigarette if someone rolled it for me. But I started smoking on that day. I felt so adult, so sophisticated. I would go on to smoke for 19 years. I'd try to quit at various times. Sometimes I would quit for a few months, but I'd always go back. I just loved that feeling of nicotine hitting my bloodstream. But in the book, Alan Carr explains how nicotine is a toxin and how awful smoking is for your body. That's something that I already knew. But he talked about how your body eventually adapts to the nicotine, and then it becomes dependent upon it. And then so as soon as you extinguish one cigarette, your body starts to go into withdrawal, causing a host of unpleasant symptoms. The pleasure I was feeling from having that next cigarette wasn't pleasure in itself. It was really relief from my withdrawal symptoms. And that insight that smoking was not adding anything good or pleasurable or desirable, it was just returning me to a state of normalcy. And that was the pleasure, was overcoming the withdrawal symptoms. And once that sunk in, I was blown away. I realized that as a smoker, I was always trying to get back to feeling normal. I remember back to my first cigarette, or any cigarette that I had after I quit for any period of time. And actually, it wasn't a pleasurable experience. It was putrid. It tasted terrible. It made me nauseous. It gave me a headache. The good feeling that I get from cigarettes didn't come until much later, once I was addicted, Alan Carr was right. I'd given away my feeling normal to the cigarette companies and then had to buy it back one cigarette at a time. What that meant was that each time I lit up a cigarette, I was starting the withdrawal clock all over again. With each cigarette, I was farther away from feeling good, not closer to it. This insight totally shifted my perspective and my relationship to cigarettes. Instead of seeing them as a source of pleasure, I now saw them as a source of my distress, a source of my suffering. Suddenly, feeling good was not about lighting up. Feeling good was about not smoking. I just had to wait until nicotine was out of my system in order to feel normal again. Alan Carr's easy way to quit smoking so profoundly shifted my perspective that it made me never want to smoke again. Previously, all the tips and tricks to stop smoking never really worked because deep down I wanted to smoke. But once I realized that smoking was not something that I wanted to do at all, then I was able to use the tools and tricks and tips to successfully kick the habit. My hope is that I can do that for you in terms of doom scrolling. I will give you another way to think about doom scrolling that will make you never want to doom scroll again. But first, we need to understand what we're dealing with. We need to understand the trap that's been set for us. So in this episode, we will understand how social media and cable news grabs our attention by looking at Chris Hayes' new book, The Siren's Call. We'll then talk about how the right wing in the Philippines manipulated social media to usher in an authoritarian regime, as discussed in Maria Resa's book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. And we'll draw from Dr. Lucy Hone's work on grief and resilience with a slight modification to find the key to freeing ourselves from doom scrolling once and for all. All right, let's get started. The day of and the days following Trump's inauguration for his second term were difficult for me. I'm sure they were difficult for you as well. One awful executive order after the other, the next one worse than the previous one, and the flood of tweets in between them. I found myself continually checking the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Blue Sky social media site, and every time I would go, I would find something horrible. 3 to 4 major news stories each day. And the particularly upsetting ones, I would pass along on Blue Sky. Did you see this? Can you believe this? I was listening to podcasts, watching YouTube, all talking about how terrible things were. I was awash in fear, anger, sadness, despair. When I was reading an article or listening to a podcast or on a YouTube video, I felt awful. I was filled with dread. But the weird thing is, I noticed that when I was not actively taking in negative news, I would feel even worse. I felt anxious. I felt a strong need to check my feeds. It was like leaving the house but thinking you left a burner going on the stove. I felt compelled to find out what was happening now, what was the latest horror. Knowing the bad news felt better than knowing that there was bad news but not knowing what it was. So I'd check the news again. I was caught in this wheel of suffering. I would feel anxious. I would check my phone. I would read a negative news story. I would feel dread. I'd put down the phone, feel anxious again, and repeat. I was trapped on this media-generated wheel of suffering. Round and round I went. I had trouble sleeping, trouble focusing. I knew it wasn't good for me, but I wanted to know what was going on. But I did start to look for a way out. I tried all the self-help type of solutions, putting my phone away, removing my apps, setting timers, but none of that worked for very long. I was completely hooked until, well, before we get to that, we need to understand the trap that we find ourselves in. Spoiler alert, it's not your fault. Let's turn to Chris Hayes' book called The Siren's Call. First, we need to understand how attention works and how social media in particular has hacked into our nervous system. In Chris Hayes' new book, The Siren's Call, which I highly recommend, Hayes talks about how it is widely accepted that we live in an information age. Information is infinite. It is everywhere, and more information becomes available each nanosecond. But what is limited, what is not infinite, what makes information valuable is attention, our attention. And our attention is finite. Attention is precious. It is all that we have as human beings. What we pay attention to over our lifetimes is what our life consists of. And just as Marx talked about how labor became bought and sold in the marketplace, what is being bought and sold in the marketplace now is our attention. He talks about how technology companies, particularly those in the digital economy, Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, TikTok, are best understood as attention companies. They monetize our attention. They do this by selling advertising space to get in front of our eyeballs. Unlike traditional commodities like a washer and dryer, the supply of human attention is fixed. To increase their access to this limited resource, attention capitalists must find new ways to take it from us. But before we get to how they do that, first we need to talk about what attention is. Hayes delineates 3 types of attention. There's voluntary attention, which is consciously choosing to focus on something. This is what we normally think of when we think of attention. Think of being in a cafe and you're reading a book. There are things going on around you, people talking, but you're focused on your book. That's voluntary attention. The next type of attention is involuntary attention. That's compelled attention. So that's more of a biological thing that if something is super important, it grabs our attention involuntarily. It's not a choice. So imagine the same cafe, if someone drops a glass and it shatters, you will become aware of that instantly without a choice. That's compelled attention. The third type of attention is social attention. That's attention directed towards or received from other people. So if you are still at that cafe, if someone at another table, you're reading your book and you're focused on your book, but someone at another table mentions your name, your attention will instantly go to what they're talking about. It's almost impossible to not pay attention to that. That's because we are social creatures. Our existence, our survival from when we're very small is wired into the amount of attention we get. We need to be, to a certain extent, the center of attention from our caregivers, at least enough to get our needs met. Let's get back to how social media companies take our attention from us. Historically, media companies and news outlets tried to get and maintain our voluntary attention. They accomplish this through engaging storytelling, long narrative arcs, in-depth information. And this still exists in our society today. But holding someone's attention is much more difficult than getting someone's attention. Different people are interested in different things. Some people get bored with certain things. Social media platforms, and shortly thereafter cable news shows, realize that they can grab our attention over and over again, and they can hook you longer than they could by keeping your voluntary attention. What grabs our attention? The outrageous, the bizarre, the more sensational, the better. Think about a news ticker scrolling across the bottom of a news show. A moving graphic, quick cuts from one camera to the other. These are all ways to hack into our involuntary attention. And it's not just the visual, it's not just the fancy headlines, the clickbait. If your phone bings or buzzes or alerts pop up on your screen, these are all ways your phone is hacking into your involuntary attention. You are compelled to pay attention to that buzzing phone. It's not a choice. So if holding your attention is not the goal, then the quality of content doesn't matter. In fact, lies and distortions are more likely to get your attention. So what wins out in the end are lies, distortions, and misinformation. The more shocking and cruel, the better. But social media companies not only are hacking into our involuntary attention, they also hack our social attention. Every time someone mentions you in a comment or responds to your post or gives you a like, you get a notification. It's like hearing your name in that cafe being discussed by strangers. Your attention immediately focuses on what they are saying about you. The need for social attention is deeply ingrained in human psychology, stemming from our helplessness as infants. Seeking attention is a prime driver of human socialization, though the specific nature of attention sought is different. It could be recognition, care, love, mere notice. Competitive attention markets have a tendency to race towards the bottom, leading to sensory overload and visual pollution. It's the constant interrupt, 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 interrupt. Grab your attention, grab your attention, grab your attention. It explains why spam is such a problem. Corporations exploit our innate psychological and biological wiring to capture and commodify our attention, leading to feelings of alienation and distraction. What is being produced is more and more spam. Spam here is defined as when someone grabs your attention not for your benefit, but for their benefit. Spam will always exist whenever attention collects. It's like weeds growing wherever crops are cultivated. It cannot be defeated, only managed. So it's within this context of attention capture that we segue nicely into Maria Ressa's book on social media and authoritarianism. Maria Ressa is a Filipino-American dual citizen and an acclaimed Nobel Prize-winning journalist. She is known for courageously fighting for the freedom of press and against disinformation and authoritarianism. She is the author of How to Stand Up to a Dictator. I would recommend that book, especially if you like a heavy dose of autobiography with your political theory. I would prefer sort of more political theory, less autobiography, but that's just me. But in the book, she talks about what the core problem is. The core problem for Ressa is the platform design and business models of social media platforms. Like Chris Hayes, she talks about how social media algorithms are built for engagement and time on site. But she goes a bit further to talk about content and its emotional engagement. Emotionally engaging content keeps us on the site longer. And emotionally engaging content is what we share on social media. And what engages us the most are three things: anger, fear, and hate. The platforms and their algorithms prioritize this emotionally laden content because it drives engagement, which in turn drives revenue. This creates a feedback loop where distressing content is amplified. What's more, Ressa goes on to talk about how the right wing, in addition to this sort of passive manipulation, the right wing in the Philippines wage an overt campaign to manipulate public opinion through the use of social media to usher in an authoritarian regime. Ressa's book is a stark warning about the global rise of authoritarianism facilitated by the deliberate misuse of technology and the legal system. If you're interested to learn more about the specifics and how the right wing does this, I would recommend her book. And it might be where we're headed in the United States. But for our purposes, we need to look deeper into what happens when you are angry or scared, when you enter into that fight-flight mode. First, let's look at our brain's negativity bias. So our brains have evolved to pay attention to and remember the negative rather than the positive. Research has shown that negative news clips elicit stronger autonomic responses than positive ones, which makes sense. It's more important to remember that a mountain lion lives in a cave by a cliff than to remember that there's a nice view up there. If someone says, hey, where do you want to have a picnic? If you only remember the view and not the mountain lion, you might say, yeah, let's go to that cliff. There's really a great view. It's really important that we remember the negative. It's a survival thing. It's wired in. And headlines that invoke fear, anger, hate grab our attention more, and so outcompete neutral or good news headlines in the social media space. Our brains are scanning for negative news, but what happens once we read the bad news? When we read negative news, the amygdala senses danger first. This small almond-shaped part of our brain is like the internal alarm system. The amygdala flags the story as emotionally important. It basically shouts, pay attention, this matters. It doesn't wait for you to think, it just reacts before you even realize what's happening. It sends a distress signal to the rest of your brain that this is bad. This activates our stress response. It talks to our hypothalamus, which triggers your HPA axis to release cortisol and adrenaline, your stress hormones. That's why your heart might race and your stomach might tighten when you're reading distressing headlines. This also strengthens emotional memory. The amygdala helps store the event in long-term memory, especially if it's scary, tragic, or shocking. This is why emotionally intense news tends to stick with you longer than positive or neutral stories. So we know what adrenaline is. We all know that adrenaline rush. It's what gives us energy to fight or to run away. But it also releases cortisol. What's cortisol? Cortisol is your built-in alarm signal. Cortisol is called the stress hormone because it shows up when we're under pressure or we need energy. Cortisol itself is not bad. In the morning, it helps us wake up and feel alert. It gives us energy to get things done in the day. And at nighttime, it's at its lowest level so we can sleep, so we can relax and go to sleep. Cortisol releases sugar into our bloodstream to give our muscles energy. It raises our blood pressure to keep oxygen flowing. It turns down our non-emergency jobs like digestion and our long-term immune system. The problem is our brain can't always tell the difference between real-world danger and distressing information on a screen. Experiments have showed that reading or watching negative news can boost stress reactivity and trigger a measurable cortisol rise, especially in women. Chronically high cortisol messes with our sleep, with our memory. It pushes blood sugar and blood pressure up. It makes us store extra fat around our bellies, and it weakens our immune system. You might notice this in yourself. Some symptoms include butterflies in your stomach or a feeling of nausea, shaky hands, dry mouth, trouble thinking clearly. When we're in these stress states, our connection to our prefrontal cortex, that's the side of our brain that integrates, that's the side of higher thinking, that gets pushed to the background. That gets dulled. If you're physically confronting danger, fear, adrenaline, cortisol, are all good things. That gives you the energy to do what you need to do to have the best chance of survival. One time I was in New York, I had earbuds in and a hoodie up, and I was crossing the street, stop signs, 4 stop signs. And I looked to the right, I looked to the left, started crossing, looked back to the right, and there was a car going really fast. It must not have stopped at the previous stop sign. And I just noticed, I observed my body start to run away from the car. I got about 2 steps and I realized, I guess my body realized that I wasn't gonna outrun this car. And I jumped and the car clipped my legs out. And I rolled a somersault, rolled up over the windshield and off the side of the car and landed on my feet. All of that was, well, it wasn't good, but I'm glad I had adrenaline and cortisol pumping through my system that allowed me to act that nimbly. I was taking ninjutsu at the time, and so it came into handy. And I was very lucky to get out of that with only a stiff neck. In those situations, if you're under physical threat, then fear or anger, cortisol, adrenaline, those are really good things to help you survive and protect yourself or run away, do what you need to do. But when we're reading a headline, those same hormones are kicking and coursing through our bodies. And that is not healthy when it's repeated over and over and over again. It leads to sleep disruption. It leads to indigestion. It leads to anxiety. It can lead to burnout. It can lead to then depression and all sorts of things. But there's more. There's another chemical that sort of locks this in. You wonder, well, why would we do this to ourselves? If we're feeling so bad and revved up and all of that, why would we continue to do this? There's another hormone called dopamine. Dopamine is your brain's do this again messenger. Whenever we're surprised, whenever we find something, dopamine is released. And sometimes it's good news, right? If you're out camping and you're going through the woods and you find a blueberry bush, woo, psyched. Dopamine is released. That's like, oh, let's do this again. You gather those berries, but that dopamine makes you want to seek out another blueberry bush. This is a great survival thing. So we don't just like find one blueberry bush and say, we're done. If we have a whole village to feed, we want to find a bunch of blueberry bushes to get enough blueberries to share. Dopamine is that seeking hormone, the more, do this again, need more, find, look out. But that is also, it's not just with good things that we find, it's bad things that we find too. It's anything that's a surprise, like, oh, whoa. So when we look for negative news or even come across it in our feed, boom, there's a dopamine hit. Whenever there's a ping and someone responded to your post, there's a dopamine hit. There's like, oh, I have to seek out. It doesn't matter if it is positive or negative. When you seek out negative news and you find it, your brain releases dopamine. It's a reward hormone that makes you want to seek out more. This is the social media generated wheel of suffering that I was stuck in. Anxiety, worry, I would see some bad news. The amygdala would kick in, the alarm system, adrenaline would be released, cortisol would be released. I would be in this hyper-vigilant state. I would scan for more threats. I would find something, some negative news. I would get a dopamine hit. I want to find more negative news. I would trigger my amygdala and get more adrenaline, more cortisol, be more alert, more hypervigilant. I put down my phone, but I would still be in this aroused, hypervigilant state. And so then I still have dopamine, like find more. What else is going on? What else is bad? Tell me more. And so then I would go back to the phone, and that is the wheel of suffering. I call it the media-generated wheel of suffering, maybe the social media wheel of suffering. And I was caught on it. And this eventually can lead to burnout, exhaustion, depression, feelings of hopelessness. So how do we get off the media-generated wheel of suffering? To answer that question, we need to turn to the work of resilience expert Dr. Lucy Hone. Dr. Hone is a resilience researcher who tragically lost her 12-year-old daughter in a car accident. Out of that experience, she wrote a book entitled Resilient Grieving. I came across her ideas on a podcast when I was doing research on resilience, and something she said really helped me. She said that there are 3 things resilient people do when tragedy strikes. First, resilient people accept that suffering is part of life. Rather than asking, why me? Resilient people recognize that pain, loss, hardship are part of the human experience. They feel grief, but they don't feel singled out by it. They don't take it personally. They realize that everyone will suffer at one point or another. We will do a whole episode on acceptance at some point later because it can be tricky, but it's so important psychologically to come to accept what is happening in the world. Not to accept that it should be happening, this is where it gets tricky, but to accept what is actually happening. The second thing that resilient people do is they pay attention to what is still good. So it doesn't mean like staying positive or denying your pain. Instead, it's about deliberately noticing beauty, kindness, moments of peace, even while grieving. This is sometimes called benefit finding, identifying slivers of meaning and value in hard experiences. We'll also do an episode on what I call living the life you're fighting for. And third, resilient people focus on what they can control. Even in overwhelming circumstances, resilient individuals shift their attention towards actions, choices, and thoughts they can influence. This helps restore a sense of agency, which grief can strip away. Now, here's the question that really helped me. After her daughter's death, when she was involved in some activity, Hone would consciously ask herself, is what I'm doing right now helping or harming me? She gave the example of looking at a photo album at like 2 or 3 in the morning. She asked herself, is this helping or is this harming me? And usually the answer, she would check inside. And sometimes the answer was, no, I need to do this. I need to grieve. I need to look at these photos and feel my feelings. But sometimes I was like, no, this is not helping me, that I actually need a good night's sleep. I've done this enough. I need to let this go for now. And this gets back to our transformance drive. In the first episode, and if you haven't listened to that, you should go check that out. We talked about that ember of resilience that you have inside you. I want you to get in touch with that inner voice, that inner guidance, that inner direction. When you take a pause and you ask yourself, is this helping me right now? Listen to the answer you got and follow that. So this simple question helped her redirect her behavior and her thoughts towards healing, even during intense sorrow. This question itself, when I'm doom scrolling, helps me. Is this really helping me right now? That creates a space, because I know the answer most of the time is no, it's not helping me. But here's how I modified that question to fit my own circumstance. And this simple question broke the vice grip of doom scrolling for me. So the question I had for myself was, right now, who is in control of my nervous system, me or Donald Trump? Trump captured the White House. He captured the Senate. He captured the FBI. He captured the Justice Department. And with every one of his outrageous tweets, his trolling tweets, his executive orders, he was also capturing my nervous system. He was making me afraid, angry, depressed, enraged. When MAGA people talk about owning the libs, this is what they're talking about. They were owning me. I realized that Trump was taking up space in my head. I was not present with my family. I was not present with my kids. It was hard to think. I was in distress all the time. But this thought of, wait a minute, this guy is in charge of my nervous system. I don't want that. That is horrible. I want to stop that. Like, yes, I know it's not good for me, but also like I will be darned if I let him take me over. What it helped me do was to mobilize my anger in a really good way, to set a boundary, to push out this toxic influence in my life, to push Donald Trump and his tweets out of my brain and out of my life. I didn't need to expose myself to this. And I hear what you're saying, but Michael, we need to know what's going on in the world. Yes, I agree. That's a separate question. We do not need to doom scroll. Doom scrolling is not good for us ever. Doom scrolling is what they want us to do. They want us to be depressed, to be sad, to be enraged, to feel despondent, to feel overwhelmed, to not live our lives, to not connect with other people. There are very important things that we need to be doing, including knowing what's going on in the world. But frying our nervous systems is not an effective way to do that. Trust me, the next episode, we will talk about how to do that. We'll start to talk about that. But the point I want you to get right now is that doom scrolling is what they want you to do. And when you doom scroll, they've captured your nervous system. Let me give you a metaphor to sink this in deeper. My wife and I are watching The Last of Us. If you're not familiar with The Last of Us, it's a zombie apocalypse show. It's based on a game that's also a zombie apocalypse shooter. I hear it's a very good game if you're into that sort of thing. If you're into zombie apocalypse shows, I would recommend Last of Us. It's a good one. Good character development, an interesting spin on zombies. So I don't think this is a spoiler because it's revealed, I think, in the first episode. But they do an interesting thing with zombies. Technically, zombies are from Haiti, and they have, it's reanimated corpses, but there's a sorcerer, a conjurer who's in control of the zombies. In a lot of zombie apocalypse movies, that's not the situation. They're just zombies. There's some infection or something that turns them into zombie. There's no an evil genius behind them. But what's interesting in Last of Us is that the zombies are being controlled, but they're being controlled by mushrooms. Now, hold on. So if you're not familiar with this is based on some science. In the show, they talk about the cordyceps mushroom, which apparently can turn insects into zombies and make them do things. In the show, the cordyceps mushroom mutates and then it infects humans. The humans then are spreading the fungus. So they're zombies. So I looked into it and I was like, okay, I need to do some research here. And it's based on something that really happens. There's something called, so it's not cordyceps, but it's related to cordyceps. It's ophiocordyceps. So ophiocordyceps mushrooms infect and turn ants into zombies. The fungus infects the host ant and it controls their behavior. It makes them leave the colony, climb up to where there are perfect conditions for the fungus to grow. It has the right amount of sunlight, right amount of humidity, and it makes the ant bite down on a leaf to secure the ant while the fungus grows inside of it, keeping the host body in the proper conditions. So this is frightening. And apparently this is an evolutionary adaptation to counter the ant's social immunity. Because ants live in close quarters, they dispose of bodies of other ants quickly, and they expel diseased ants. The reason why ophiocordyceps is effective is because it controls the ant's behavior to move them away from the colony so its body is not disposed of, and the ants is away from the normal routes where it can be discovered. But it is close enough so that when the fungus matures, it will release its spores and infect other ants. Ugh. But not only that, it gets worse. Funguses infect and turn other insects into zombies too. They can infect cicadas. Infected male cicadas will be made to act like female cicadas ready to mate. The fungus makes male cicadas, twitch their wings in this mating dance, which draws uninfected male cicadas to them. And when those males show up, they get infected by the zombie male cicada. They get the fungus passed on to them. And then they will turn into zombies and go on to infect still more cicadas, and on and on. So I realized that I was acting like an infected zombie cicada. I was taking in negative news, feeling fear, hate, anger, despondency, hopelessness, and then sharing that very upsetting news with other people, infecting them. The more I did, the worse I felt, and I'm sure the worse the other people who were connected to me felt. And when we met in person, it wasn't any better. We talked about all the distressing things that were happening in the world, and we would all feel worse. We would all leave not empowered and energized and feeling like doing something about it. We would feel a little depressed, sad, despondent. When our nervous systems are taken over by authoritarians, we inadvertently do their bidding. We spread the infection to uninfected others. Hey, can you believe this video? It's so messed up. Look at this. We spread fear and anger, the very things that fry our nervous system. Trump sends out a virulent tweet, and we all spread it for him. Don't be a zombie cicada. That's my message. Don't be a zombie cicada. I think I'm going to make mugs and hats and t-shirts. The way to not spread the infection is to not get infected in the first place. And if you get infected, to get the antidote. Then you can respond and connect with others without infecting them. Thich Nhat Hanh, who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. He's an activist Buddhist from Vietnam. I respect him highly. And he talks about in some interview that I heard where he would, whenever he found out some distressing news, He would do breathing and try to calm himself down. And if that didn't work, he would go for a meditative walk for 20 minutes to calm his nervous system, because he wanted to not react. He did not want to react out of anger or fear. He wanted to react out of compassion. And so he would go for a walk to calm his nervous system. And knowing that Thich Nhat Hanh, someone who was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, if he needs to do that to be engaged in the world in a way that he wants, then that gives me permission to take care of my nervous system that way too. So this one question, who is in control of my nervous system right now, me or Donald Trump, is a question that broke the spell of doom scrolling for me. It made me not want to ever doom scroll again. Why I couldn't stop smoking was because although I knew I should quit, deep down I didn't want to quit. I believe that there was something vital in that cigarette smoke, something I wanted, something I desperately needed. It wasn't until I read Carr's book that I realized that smoking was actually preventing me from getting what I needed. In that moment, everything shifted, and the very idea of smoking became repellent. In the very same way, once I realized that my nervous system was captured by Trump, doom scrolling became repellent. I thought that there was something important, something I needed in the doom scrolling, just like in the cigarette smoke. But I've realized that there is nothing there for me that is making me feel worse. It's playing into their hands. And I can hear your objections, but it's important to stay informed. Don't we need to know what's going on? Yes, we do. But here's the problem. There's a lot of talk, and I talked about it here as well. Talk about misinformation, disinformation, distortion, all of that. And that's a big problem. And, I look at Maria Ressa's book for ways to deal with that. I really support that work. But we have a bigger problem now. And the bigger problem is what happens when the truth itself is toxic? What happens when finding out what's going on, if we really sit with it and really find it out, can threaten to overwhelm us and can threaten to make us shut down? That is a more serious problem. But that's where we're at, and that's the problem we need to address. And so that will be next episode. I will look at what happens when truth is toxic. And the title of the show is The Moth, the Ostrich, and the Gorgon. So subscribe. You do not want to miss that episode. And if you subscribe on Substack, you can get our newsletter. And in our newsletter, I will show links that go to these zombie cordyceps creatures. They're fascinating to look at. If you're not into that, I totally get it. Then just skip that email. All right, until next time. Thanks for joining us on Resilience in Dark Times. Remember, building resilience isn't a solo project. It's something we do together. If this episode helped you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and visit resilienceинdarktimes.com to join our community of people who refuse to give up. Until next time, stay strong, stay connected, and keep resisting.